In a recent video, I was talking about 10 RPGs that are great for beginners and 5 that I would recommend that beginners avoid. And that sparked a little bit of controversy in the comments, so today I'm going to be taking a look at the framework that I built to help me decide what games I wanted to include in said list, because I can't just make a top 10 list without thinking about it. I overthink the hell out of pretty much everything, especially when it comes to RPGs. And if you're new here, be sure to get subscribed because I am Super Derek. I make thoughtful and thought-provoking videos for gamers who love RPGs, and this is what I think it takes to be a good, beginner-friendly RPG. And we're going to be going in ascending order from least important to most important, and we're starting with quality. Why would I start with quality? Is it because you can just recommend junk RPGs to newcomers? No. It's because quality is the floor here when it comes to making suggestions for RPGs, not the bar. Quality alone does not make a game beginner friendly. It's not the hurdle, that is the track that we're running on here, guys. So no matter how good the game is, if it fails in some of these other aspects, I still wouldn't recommend them to a beginner. So this next one is the difficulty or easiness of the game, and it's still pretty low on the list of criteria that I have. For the most part, RPGs tend to sort of self-regulate their difficulty through methods like grinding, through people deciding to avoid battles whenever that's possible. Really, what you need to do when considering difficulty or easiness of an RPG is to consider avoiding both extremes. Shin Megami Tensei could be pretty rough. Also avoid games like Mystic Quest, for instance, which is insultingly easy because it was made for beginners. Sure, they nailed some aspects of it, but failed in other regards that are a bit more important. Sure, it's easy, fine, but where's the challenge? There is joy and pleasure in overcoming a challenge. What fun is it to knock over an anthill? Maybe when you're really young, it's fun to enable cheats and play on God mode, but eventually you're gonna get really bored with just killing everything all the time without putting in any thought or effort, and someone's just gonna think, oh, this is what RPGs are like? They're bad. So this is one of the other main reasons that I told people to avoid Mystic Quest. And there will be a few other reasons that we'll talk about here, but before we do, let's talk about the duration of a game. Again, it's definitely important to a point, more like bonus points if a game is nice and short. If you can beat it in a weekend, you can get some easy wins under your belt if you're doing that. When it comes to really long games, do I find that that's a deterrent? Should that be a consideration when you're making recommendations to newcomers? Obviously, you want to leave players wanting more by the end, but it's not higher on this list because I think many, or even most of us, don't actually finish every single RPG that we play. If you're having trouble finishing the games and RPGs that you want to play, I do have a video that I recommend you check out about how to defeat your backlog and beat RPGs. I'll have a link to it somewhere. I mean, we still find fulfillment and enjoyment in these games even when we don't finish them. So is duration really that important? Sometimes. A short video game will be, again, easy to get some easy wins under your belt to, get you familiar with the genre, but also it's easier to commit to a shorter game, like Chrono Trigger, which you could easily beat, and depending on who you are and how adept you are to the game, you could beat it in 15 hours, or if you're more of a completionist going without a guide, it could take up to like 25 hours. Short games like that, they can be appealing to newcomers, but also one of the reasons that I don't think it should be more high on this list is because most gamers these days won't think twice about putting in 100, 200 hours into Halo or Fortnite or whatever it is that they're playing these days. I don't know, because I only play RPGs, but I do know that gamers who are interested in gaming are not averse to spending a lot of time. Sure, it might seem daunting to say this game is 100 hours long, and that could shock them a little bit, but if they saw their playtime on Fortnite or Halo or whatever, I'm sure it would dwarf how much time you could spend on most RPGs that only go 100 hours, because at least those have a defined ending point. So yeah, duration, if you're planning on beating the game, that might be a consideration, but if you're just trying to get into the game, having a short game would be nice, but it's not a make or break situation for a lot of people. But it is a consideration, putting it about midway through this list. One that I think is a bit more important than that, though, is combat complexity, which ties somewhat into difficulty, but in a more specific way, because I feel like If you recommend a difficult game to somebody like Shin Megami Tensei 5, sure, they'll think this game is really hard, and they'll be frustrated by that, sure, and they'll probably quit. But when somebody is provided a game that is just overly complex for them, if they're having some trouble really kind of getting into the battle system, they keep forgetting things, that, instead of feeling difficult, will feel like they're not smart enough or they are missing information, and it'll make them feel bad about themselves. And there's a very important distinction between those things, because sure, a game can be challenging and that can be fun, and maybe they'll know if it's a very difficult game that they'll need to come back to it later on. But if it's a game that makes them feel dumb, then who's going to want to play a game that makes them feel that way? So when I make suggestions for games, I try to make games that give on-the-job training, so to speak. Games that will teach people and reinforce positive RPG gameplay mechanics, paying attention to elemental affinities and weaknesses, and establishing sort of a baseline, Dragon Quest sort of style system where you have plenty of time to consider the current situation in combat and plan out a few moves in advance. It's all about establishing that baseline and then building onto it from there. Another one that I think is really hard to quantify and qualify is the time to investment, and I think it's really important on this one. None of the above things that we talked about right now will matter if the player just absolutely doesn't care. You need a game that gives the player a hook of some sort, something that will grab their attention and get them invested very quickly, preferably something that happens even before the first combat within the game, if at all possible, because this is what's going to provide players with the motivation to learn the combat system, to dive deeper. If it's got a bad story and all you care about is when can I finish playing to get my boyfriend to shut up, then you're not gonna have a good time, and you're not gonna get into RPGs, at least until that motivation factor kicks in, until the game is able to get its hooks into you. It is sometimes difficult to find the perfect game for everybody. Knowing a bit about the person before you make the recommendation, though, can make a huge impact, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that a little bit later on. But the next one that I really wanted to talk about is availability and affordability. If they can't afford to play it, why would you even recommend it? And this is also one of those sorts of things that ties into Mystic Quest, and why I think that's a really bad suggestion for people, because if a Super Nintendo itself, by itself, costs $90 and Chrono Trigger costs $240, that's $330 to start, which is why I recommended the PC version. Mystic Quest, on the other hand, is only $15, but $15 for the cartridge plus a $90 Super Nintendo is $105. Just to get started, I can't in good conscience recommend anybody spend a bunch of money to get into a hobby before they have started that hobby. And I know that a lot of you are already shaking your heads and screaming emulation from the mountaintops or wherever the heck you are, because emulation is obviously really easy for a few of us. But not everybody. Emulation is something that a lot of us were born into, molded by. We are used to sailing the high seas. It can be a little bit daunting to figure out, first, what is a ROM? Second, what is an emulator? 3, where do I get ROMs now that all these websites are going down? What's a reputable place to acquire them, and how can you do so safely and effectively? And that is a whole other rabbit hole that you already have the baseline knowledge for, that some people simply don't have or don't want to learn. Really, this looks like hacking to some people, and it makes it really hard for some people to put themselves in the shoes of the guy who's just playing Halo down the street and wants to maybe give this turn-based thing a try because he thought Final Fantasy VII Remake was fun. So when it comes to availability and affordability, I think that is actually paramount to any of this. Stick to the things that they already know how to do, and then build on from there. Once they have the motivation, once they say, hey, I really do like these JRPGs or whatever, maybe it's worth investing some time to figure out how to play these fan translations or something. You gotta hook them with something easy first, and then you can get them hooked and get them into the good stuff, you know? I feel like a drug pusher saying that. Bonus tip is to really target what you're doing. Make some targeted suggestions based off of what you know about the person that you're trying to make recommendations to. And I have a whole video just dedicated specifically to how to get into RPGs, and I go into this subject at length just like I did in today's video. And speaking of which, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave it a like or something, I guess. Doesn't seem like YouTube cares if you subscribe or ring the bell, but it helps me feel good about myself, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day, everybody.